Hello, and welcome to the Argyle CFO Leadership Forum. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our panel moderator. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our moderator, Keith Neal, Chief Financial Officer, Advocates. We're super excited to have Keith and our panelists for a panel discussion titled Growth Strategies for the Modern CFO. Welcome, Keith. Over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. And thank you to everyone joining us today online. We've got a great topic and a great panel here today. We'll be talking about growth strategies for the modern CFO. More and more organizations are looking towards the CFO and the finance team to really drive strategic initiatives, revenue growth, and profitability. I'm joined by two panelists who we'll introduce in a second. So actually, we'll just go into right that now. So why don't we start with Ankur? Maybe you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ankur Kamkalia. I'm a director in financial planning and analysis at Prudential Financial, supporting our global technology area. Prudential, as many of you might know, is one of the largest financial services institutions operating in the insurance, retirement, and investment management space. My career started in public accounting, and I've spent a decade or so since working in financial services industry in roles spanning from internal audit to FP&A to enterprise transformation. And I'm very excited to be here, Keith.
Thank you, Ankur. Thanks for joining us. Michael.
Good morning. My name is Michael Mance. I am the Vice President of Financial Operations at Dialysis Care Center, located in the Chicagoland area. I have about 30 years of experience. Initially cut my teeth in public accounting, both in audit and tax. Then proceeded to work in industry with various Fortune 500 companies. A lot of great opportunities, experience over the years, but today's topic, I think it's just a really great one for this year and then evolving into next year.
Great. Thank you for joining us as well. And again, my name is Keith Neal. I'm the CFO at Advocates, a large nonprofit provider of health and human services in Massachusetts. In my career, I've spent time really in the big Fortune 500s and in the nonprofit healthcare space as well. So with that, why don't we jump right into it? So to kick things off, Ankur, why don't we bring the first question to you? So maybe you can talk about, so before we start talking about strategies and some of the evolving role, maybe we can talk a little bit about lessons learned over the past year, for CFOs and their finance teams.
Yeah, I can start there, Keith. I would say 2023 has, without a doubt, been an explosive year for technology and generative AI. In the last 9 months or so, we've seen a lot of these Gen AI tools being launched, and you'll see business leaders telling you about their expectations for Gen AI are really, really high. And you see that reflected in the investments that are being made, across multiple companies within the technology sector, but also, other sectors as well. So the theme that I wanted to sort of, talk about here is really just, the developments are pointing to generative AI being a force in sort of helping our associates, becoming more efficient in their roles, doing their jobs better. For my company in particular, I'm in insurance, and insurance, the faster you can process a claim, accurately, the less it costs to serve a customer. And that helps us drive our costs down and make us competitive in the marketplace. At the same time, insurance is a very highly regulated industry, and there's a high degree of sort of connection, human to human connection. And, one thing I would say I'm taking away from 2023 is that Gen AI probably, is there to sort of help make things more efficient for us, but won't really be, replacing our agents or associates, because we might be doing a lot of experimentation and investing a lot in Gen AI to free up the time of our associates, that'll hopefully, guide us to sort of, invest that time in more high value adding activities. So that will be a key takeaway for me for this year.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I think we could probably do a whole panel discussion just on the topic of generative AI and kind of the evolving role of the finance team. I think so I completely agree with everything you said. I think the one item I think I would throw in that my team has focused a lot on over the past year has really been around scenario planning, right? It's like we're kind of coming off of, pandemics. We've got things like interest rate fluctuations. We've got, tightening credit, loosening credit, supply chain distributions, issues with talent, or not issues with talent, but rather issues with attracting talent. So, certainly scenario planning from an operational and financial point has certainly been really big on my radar over the past year. I don't know, Mike, would you agree with those?
I would, and then, to Encore's point, upgrading the current ERP systems, that what we've done on the accounting side, and expense management, like you mentioned, especially like rising costs regarding like medical insurance and things of that nature. But also, I think it's important with your existing vendor relationships, as your company is growing, that you need to have vendors that can grow with you. Also, provide competitive pricing and also technology solutions.
Great. All right, so kind of carrying this theme forward, Michael, I'll propose the next question to you. So thinking about kind of the groundwork that Encore laid, kind of answering her question, like what does this mean for the CFO and the finance teams in terms of the roles they take on? Certainly, we've got the statutory and regulatory stuff we have to do, right? We have to file tax returns, close the books, file all sorts of other filings. But what other roles do you see the CFO and the finance team starting to take on more and more as organizations, start to look at how to best accelerate growth?
Yeah, great question. I believe from my point of view, the role is evolving. I would break it down to, people, process, and technology. I believe you need to have a strategic mindset. I think it's paramount that you invest and retain in your team. Also, you have to have, from a technology standpoint, continuous improvements. That needs to be ongoing all the time. Maintaining and building, strong vendor partnerships, like I mentioned. But also, I think it's evolving from an operational perspective, whatever industry you are, and supporting your business partners. And then, as we've talked about, just upgrading the technology and updating and upgrading the automation processes, just to make, everything from on your team side more efficient and more effective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things I've seen, talking to kind of our peers in the field too, is that given the level of partnership that CFOs and finance teams often have with the service and the business lines, that there are times where the CFO and the finance team can be really looked at as kind of really the trusted business partner in terms of thinking through strategy, right? And looking at new markets and looking at potentially new initiatives to implement. So as we start to think about how CFOs are starting to position initiatives, for the upcoming year, right? So we're nearly at the end of the year. 2024 is coming up. There's certainly a lot of variability. Maybe I guess I would characterize the environment right now as being, a lot of things sort of swirling around. So Encore, like when you're looking at 2024, what are the key strategic initiatives that you view as being absolutely critical for the CFO and the finance teams to be focused on?
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, I would say that, what finance would sort of, the initiatives that you'll be focused on would really be dependent on what industry you're in, what is your business strategy. So it'd be different for each company. What competitive landscape your organization is in. But I know you're looking for a real life example. So what I can tell you, looking at my organization, my company Prudential's, our strategy is to become a higher growth, less market sensitive and a more nimble company. And we are, striving to sort of optimize our operating model and continuously sort of driving both efficiency and growth. We have been investing in, our e-capabilities and, making it easier for our customers to access life insurance. We are continuously sort of repricing our products and, to make sure we're delivering value. And an example of how we are doing that, delivering that value is our investment in, proprietary AI underwriting tools. And one of those tools that we are investing in is called, it's an internally developed tool. It's called AccuSight. We are it's a AI-driven longevity model that originates from our, some innovation in our individual life business. And we've used that to sort of transform the underwriting processes at Prudential. And we are looking to now sort of commercialize that and licensing it out to, other organizations with, best in class insights on longevity estimates. And this is sort of an example of a strategic initiative that we are sort of, investing in to be less market sensitive as is our goal.
Okay. Yeah, that's I think I want to maybe pick up on your theme of I think you mentioned you called it e-capabilities, right? So I think thinking about some of the things going on in my shop, I don't want to talk about two brief examples, then I can throw it over to Michael for some additional context. But some of the initiatives that me and my team have been focused on, one is certainly around digital transformation, right? We're, my own organization, we're in the middle of upgrading our general ledger, right, to be able to handle two mergers that we've got going on right now. So we've got two parallel mergers underway right now. We need to upgrade our general ledger and really start looking at our processes around how do we move from something like paper mileage reimbursement forms to online automated systems that move things quicker, reduces the amount of friction in those transactions. And then the other big thing, I think it has been really focusing in on data analytics and predictive analytics. We've as an organization, we've recently entered into some new care delivery contracts. Right? We opened up a new community behavioral health center in Metro West Boston area. And a key portion of that is really being able to understand what's happening, from like a clinical level and translating that into an operational and a financial level so that we can make sure that we're negotiating, the right, alternative payment models or bundled rates and staffing it correctly. So there's a lot of that, and this really goes back to the generative AI comment from earlier. There's so much technology in there. It can be easy sometimes to get a little overwhelmed by all of it. But I think digital transformation and data analytics and business intelligence are really two areas we're focusing in on as something that we think will really be growth accelerators. So I guess so Michael, what are your thoughts on some of the?
Yeah, I think those are two great answers. I think you need the technology and the people put in place to support the growth, whether it's organically and then, as you mentioned, through acquisitions as well. You got to have the right processes and the people and the technology to support that growth. If you don't, it's not going to turn out well.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about technology, kind of over the last several minutes. Actually, a question had come in, so we're gonna jump around maybe a little bit. But a question came in that I'll read off now, and maybe our panelists might want to respond to it. So the question is, what recommendations can you make for organizations struggling to find the right tools or technology for their finance teams? So maybe given that we've kind of shifted some of this to technology, maybe we can kind of jump in and answer that right now. So Encore, maybe you want to kick us off on this topic?
Yeah. So technology for the finance function, really, our audience is very broad, and it really depends on what size of company you are, what industry you're in, what are sort of the key sort of metrics that you're looking to sort of have access to, the information that you need on a more regular basis. So one of the recommendations from me would really just be, use your network. Make sure that you are reaching out to your network and your peers in the industry to try to understand what are the things that maybe you might have some blindsiders on that you can potentially talk to others and see what problems they're facing and try to sort of how have they solved some of those issues, and use that as a guideline for what kind of tools that you might pick. But ultimately, you can change technology, but there's a lot of change that also needs to happen in people and the ways we do in behavioral change, essentially, right? And so not to sort of leave that to the last minute. Make sure that you're investing in the communication of the change. Make sure that you are engaging and bringing the stakeholders along. I think those would be my pointers.
Great, thank you, Encore. Michael, how about you? What are your thoughts on the technology question?
Yeah, another good question. We're currently going through an ERP implementation. So to Encore's point, I did reach out to my network, really got a lot of good feedback. We are a medium-sized company growing rapidly. We were still server-based. Now we are going to the cloud, but it also provided us an opportunity to look at all our processes and how we can improve them as part of the implementation. And I think, to Encore's point, the communication and obviously the change management is paramount, because it's not just affecting the accounting and finance team when you put in a new system. It could be the purchasing department, people approving expense reports, things of that nature. So collectively, you need to have the right stakeholders across the organization to have a successful implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good comment. I know earlier in my career, there was a kind of a CIO that I worked with. We talk about oftentimes there sort of can be this knee-jerk reaction just to acquire a piece of technology and overlay it on a process. And if that in and of itself doesn't really correct anything or make anything better, right? Technology on top of a bad process just kind of it sort of just accelerates your time to failure. So think along those lines, and I'll open this up for I guess both of our panelists. In your journeys to kind of identify and work with either within the finance team or within the organization on identifying technologies to implement, what strategies and techniques have you used to really kind of vet what's really needed, what the real needs are, and really how to handle the change management so that something doesn't get implemented and just automatically build up a wall of resistance in the organization and then never gets utilized. Any thoughts? What are your thoughts on maybe kind of breaking through those challenges?
Another good question. I think you need to have everybody involved. I said like the stakeholders, but at all levels, people that are processing, whether it's the revenue cycle team, collections, accounts payable, and having them identify which processes they're struggling with currently and how do you improve them. And then, getting the right administrative people, HR people involved as well, from a change management perspective. Because it does affect everything, even your payroll system, your health, your healthcare benefits, where you need to utilize that technology throughout the organization.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, having, a good, level of governance over, what kind of things you invest in is really key. That discipline is necessary. But, any person sitting in any level of finance seat, you want to make sure that you're asking the right questions and getting to the bottom of, how the technology will be utilized, so that, you can eke out some of those details and really sort of help, the organization get to the right decision.
Mhm. Yeah, those are two great points. And I think, as the CFOs and finance professionals, there is an aspect of our fiduciary responsibility to the company. One, to make sure we're deploying capital in the appropriate ways with the best ROI, but also in thinking through these projects, through the lens of like protecting the organization with a lot of the new technologies like ChatGPT or other things like that. I think there can be sometimes a thought of, hey, I can do this myself, right? I can download something from the internet, I can install it. The next thing you know, you're exposing sections of your code base to a public forum. So I think thinking about what you both said, I think the theme around engaging stakeholders, right, to really think through the aspects of those technology recommendations is critical, because there are a lot of touch points, right? So, and they're not always obvious who needs to be involved or who a particular technology or process improvement might impact. And then the governance framework, I think, is also pretty critical, right? I've seen, I'm sure people in the audience have heard, know of examples of projects that get spun up, maybe don't have the right governance project in place, and then 6 months and $1 million later, they're still, scoping out what needs to be done, right? So, and I think as our role as finance professionals, often, we're the folks that have to sit there and at times maybe be the traffic cop to make sure that things are progressing, or that people are kind of focused on the deliverables and not just, having scope creep or spend creep. So those are those are good. Yeah. So thank you both for your input on that topic. So to piggyback on that theme, so we've just talked about potential technologies we could deploy, and maybe a little bit about how you think about what you might need to do. Maybe we can talk about for how you actually start these, right? So all of these projects cost money, right? Some are cheap, some are pretty expensive. How do you determine the best investments, and then how do those decisions get communicated out to stakeholders within and outside of finance? So maybe Michael, why don't we start with you on this question?
Yeah, I would say, I think communication is, very important throughout the organization, like we explained. But, I think you need to do a ROI. We're server-based, and there's costs associated with that. With the cloud, that goes away. There was additional functionality going to a new system, which improve our processes. Additionally, you need to look at a system that will support your future growth as well, from a technology perspective, whether you're growing organically or through acquisitions. And then, with that partnership, you need to have, I think it's very important that you have to have really good customer and IT support with that vendor that you're going with from a technology standpoint. I think those points are very critical.
Yeah. And I would say, Keith, just, in terms of like how you determine the priority, I would say that working with strategy, sometimes, depending on the size of your organization, being the strategy function of your organization, might be required. As a CFO, we may not really be able to sort of, silo ourselves into particular lines of, thinking that we just got to crunch the numbers and figure out, what is that return on investment. And sometimes you might have to think more broadly, and that is the part that I sometimes have to continuously challenge myself, because I'll see people, from the different functions within the company sitting, maybe they're not asking the questions that I'm expecting them to ask. And if they're not, then I should, feel empowered to sort of, ask that question and make sure that, we are making the right decision for the company, in line with the company's business strategy.
Yeah. No, those are good points. I think I think maybe a situation too that maybe some folks in the audience can relate to is so you do all this and you come up with plans, but how do you secure the funding for it, right? I mean, I've never worked in an organization that had more budget than they needed, right? Everyone's under budget constraints. Myself, I'm in a nonprofit, so we tend to operate to a very thin margin, and we've got other financial agreements in place that, where I've got different like bond covenants to live within, right? So in the past, since I've been at Advocates, we've implemented a new financial planning and reporting system, and then we're going through an ERP system, not an ERP, but rather a general ledger upgrade right now. And those were discussions, right? Those are not cheap projects, and those consume kind of a finite amount of capital, in our budget. What I found was helpful in talking about that are some of the things you've talked about. I know, Michael, you mentioned the kind of the ROI. I think that is critical, right? All these projects, many of the projects will have a hard ROI. It's either going to drive revenue, reduce cost, or have some what I call like soft savings, where maybe you're not reducing headcount, but you're delaying the amount of growth you need in order to be able to manage your business. I guess over the course of your careers, are there any maybe tips or tricks you might want to advise or throw out for the audience around how you've kind of advocated and justified your own projects that you've been involved in?
Yeah, I would say that most of the time I find myself on the side of the person who has to sort of look at the projects and sort of see how justified that, how would you justify that, and most of the time I think what ends up happening is that you are having to talk to the person who's proposing the project and helping them understand that this is not the amount of sort of value that we need to show for the project may not be there, and having to sort of coach and guide them, but the main we are making decisions compared to each other. What is the trusting the sort of the discipline around decision making. You're going to have to show that value, and whether it is soft benefits or hard benefits, quantifying them and sort of proving the validity of those benefits is sort of where I would sort of focus. I work at a large company, and we spend over sort of $2 billion each year in technology, and I sit on the side of looking at projects and how would you decide which one to invest in. And as finance people, the focus most of the time is on the financial metrics, so the ROI or the payback period. But another thing that we need to sort of be mindful of is the timing right? Is the prioritization and sequencing right? Is this the right time to be investing in something like this? Because you might there is a lot of benefit, soft or hard, for that particular project. But if you're not considering the sequencing, what should come first, what should come second, we could sort of put ourselves in a place where we're not sort of really optimizing our returns. And so that I would say is critical.
Your comment on sequencing really resonates with me. I know, I think, certainly I imagine you both have this experience, as people in our audience do. It's as we kind of go from one budget cycle to the next, we're often presented with more good projects than we can afford to do, right? And then it comes down to looking at kind of what are the criteria you're going to use to prioritize these projects, and how do they get staggered and staged throughout the year, keeping in mind other financial targets you might have, resource constraints. Oftentimes IT, right, can be a constraint because there's such a demand for those kind of resources. Absolutely. An organization I previously worked at had a project intake process where we would look at a combination of measures and metrics. Some of them certainly financial. We would look at like a 5-year P&L and cost savings, revenue generation, but there was also a certain amount of attention paid to the operational impacts. for the project, whether they were internal to employees, is it going to make their jobs or lives easier, or impact to customers, right? Either from a product point of view or from a support point of view. So those those angles can be important, right? It doesn't always come down to dollars and cents. Sometimes those softer benefits, the customer impact benefits, in the long run, it ends up paying dividends, but in the short term, it may just be a kind of a cost. So we had let's see, another question has come in that I think is relevant to this area. So I'll jump to it right now. And the question is, what are the biggest challenges when merging old processes with new ones? So I think this sort of dovetails into the conversation around implementing technologies, and there is some process we've talked about. So I guess I'll kick it off and give my panelists a couple minutes to think about it. So as I mentioned, right now, Advocates is in the process of merging. We're going through a merger with two of our affiliates, right? So and this this does present some challenges because with some hyperbole, there's three separate companies with three ways of doing everything. I mean, that's not necessarily the case, but it is a challenge. And what we've worked through from a process has really been around first connecting the teams and the individuals in the different so I'll use finance as the example, right? We got the different finance functions together. So the payroll teams, the AP teams, the Rev Rec teams, those teams we get together and really go through a process of explaining and learning everyone's processes to see where there were overlaps and to see where folks might have been doing things as a best practice that the others weren't. So then it wasn't, it's really not about, you're going to do things our way because, we're the bigger group. It's around, who's doing this the best way and how can we incorporate those processes and kind of move forward as a team. So that's a little bit about some of the process kind of, I'm going through right now in my own organization. I guess Michael or Encore, do you have any examples of, process integration or merging of processes in your shops?
Yeah, I think you need to get everybody involved, regardless of their level throughout the organization that we've talked about. Reaching out to your network, but just continuously developing those best practices. And just what are the functionality with the technology and how does it work collectively throughout the entire organization, regardless if it's within or outside the finance.
That's a great answer, Michael, and Keith, your points as well. I think the only thing I would add there is that to be considerate of what we can stop doing as well, because it's we there's a tendency to be sort of additive, and you add new steps for folks to follow, and we want to also be thinking about what could we cut out from this process, how could we simplify. It's not very often that we come across these kind of opportunities, so you want to make sure you take that and simplify as well.
Great answer.
Yeah, no, that's a key point. I want to put a little extra emphasis on, right? I think you're right. We're often so focused on adding and improving, we don't always think about like how can we reduce, right? Because a lot of times this historical momentum, right? It's the way we've always done it, sort of reinforces that. And I think the other comment I'd add to this too is as teams come together, Michael talked about getting people involved at all levels. And that's absolutely critical, right? I think it kind of, at our levels, like once as you start to rise through the finance ranks, and certainly, at the controller and CFO level, we're often removed from the day-to-day details of like how journal entries get booked or how certain transactions happen in the scene. So getting people closest to the actual work is certainly key. And then having a level of respect and appreciation for the processes of the other teams, of the other organization, I think is also important. I think, regardless of your size as an organization, the way you're doing, the way someone's doing something today, it's there for a reason, either out of necessity or, some process or something, right? It's not as if someone was trying to create a potentially bad procedure, right? So I think having that kind of respect and understanding that, everyone's trying to do the same thing, but they might go about it a little differently. Merging processes is really around kind of optimizing, right? What's best for the organization? How do we make things, the best for our employees, for our subordinates, for our customers and the people we support. So all great answers. Thank you. Thank you to both the panelists for jumping in on that question. So I want to maybe pivot just a little bit in terms of priorities. So one of the things we haven't talked about yet is really the priority around expanding into new markets, right? Is it a priority? How do you go about doing that? So we've talked about other areas for the CFO, but how much of a priority do you both see, new market expansion, either geographies or lines of business or, other areas? How much of that is a priority, for you or your organization, or how critical is that to the kind of the role of the finance team? So I'll open that up to either of our panelists.
Okay. Another good question. I would say it depends on the type of business. We're in the healthcare space. We are a national company over 8 states, but so it's more geographic based in what that patient base would be that has those needs to provide those healthcare services to them. But even expanding into new markets, it's finding the right team to put in place to support in that area, or you might have existing locations you might want to expand in the existing geographic area. There could be potential synergies there as well. And then obviously the ROI on, the expansion, both current state and future state.
Yeah, Keith, I would just say that, depending on the size of the organization, this could be a very big or very, a small part of the CFO's work. I work for a large organization, and we do have a sort of a dedicated strategy team and department. So I haven't had to delve in it too much myself, but occasionally we will have product expansion discussions and what the implications are of that. And so we engage with that, and really just it becomes at that point more a question of how to sort of add value to the discussion to drive to the right decision for the company. So just making sure that we're thinking about the prospects and what it really entails, and really just keeping an open mind at some point and asking the questions that come to you.
Okay. So sort of building upon what you've both said, I think I want to talk about two things and maybe get your reaction or response to that. So one is, I know, a couple of years ago, I had a conversation with a couple of our board members around whether or not there was a growth imperative for the organization, right? And again, we're a nonprofit, but I think this would apply to even, for-profit, investor-owned businesses as well, right? So, and some of that conversation went like, like if we're not growing into new markets or expanding service lines, are we going to be able to generate the right level of net margin to put new investments into our people and programs, and into raises, right? So so are we really locked into this growth imperative where we have to grow to do that? And I think from my view, I think there is some element of truth in that, right? I think certainly we need to be profitable, even as a nonprofit, right? Vendors want to get paid, people want to get paid, we want to make new investments. But we also want to make sure we can provide raises and kind of keep up with the cost of living, which as a nonprofit in the health and human service space can be difficult sometimes. A lot of our revenue is generated from contracts with Medicaid or with various state agencies, so those can be tough. So actually, I'll stop with that one. So with your organizations, do you see growth as an imperative for your organizations in order to thrive?
Absolutely, Keith. Yeah, I work in the insurance industry, and you can say that we have so many smaller sort of competitors in startup excuse me in the startup world that are coming up now, you cannot be, complacent about growth, for multiple reasons, right? Like you could lose your competitive advantage to somebody, younger, faster, operating, organization, but also that, you will find it harder to retain and attract talent. Employees want to work for a company that's growing. They want to see their own growth path, their own career growth. From my perspective, definitely, growth is imperative.
Yeah, I would concur there. Especially Don Course point is investing and retaining in your current team, which is paramount, but it's also on the technology side, providing those opportunities because employees are not going to want to work for a company that is behind the times per se in technology. They want it more best practice, cutting edge, simplifying their current tasks and responsibilities. I think that's really a key factor investing and retaining employees.
Yeah, that's a real good point. And that's, I think, one that is not often at the forefront when people sort of think of this, right? Because there is, from a attractability of candidate point of view, there is some benefit to joining a company that has scale, right? That is able to invest in new technologies, that isn't necessarily living kind of like month to month in terms of making margin or payroll numbers. Yeah. So that's actually that's a pretty good point. I think that the employee aspect, or that the ability to retain and attract talent through growth sometimes can be overlooked. The other item I guess I wanted to mention kind of on this topic is around smart growth. And I guess not to throw around kind of platitudes, but I think smart growth is certainly important. Coming from as CFO of a nonprofit, it's not as if I could just go like buy like another nonprofit, right? There has to be some level of consensus and agreement. So as we've looked at affiliate partners or merger partners, right? We certainly want to make sure we're identifying high degrees of synergies in terms of mission alignment, some high level consensus on how we run our operations and the different service lines, and then look at kind of what do we each have to offer each other, right? So I think and this isn't just the nonprofit space, but a lot of industries will cyclically go through periods of expansion and contraction where you see a lot of mergers, right, because of changing market conditions. I know going back toward the height of COVID, we saw in Massachusetts in the nonprofit space there was a lot of contraction, right? Agencies, nonprofit organizations had to come together to achieve some level of scale to kind of get through some of those early days of COVID. And then some of that has sort of has increased as more and more funders now look toward alternative payment models or quality-based contracting, right? So I think there's an element of smart growth that that's important as we think about this topic. Looks like we've got about 5 minutes left here. So there was another question that came in that I think we maybe have addressed. There was a question around what new markets will teams be focused in on in the new year. I think we've covered some of that. I guess I know, like I said, and in my space, we're going through two mergers right now that increased our service portfolio as well as our geographic footprint, right? And those are two things that we were looking for. My company will be starting its next strategic planning process pretty soon, and I expect strategic growth will be another factor there. Because again, as we look at the landscape, there is some advantage to being bigger, but being bigger just for the sake of being bigger is not what we're going for. We want to be bigger because we think that gives us more leverage with with funders. It gives us an ability to scale up and provide a better level of services for the people we support, and provide better job and career opportunities for our staff. Those are really kind of critical functions. So as I guess the last thing I'll throw out maybe for the quickly the Encore and Michael you could answer is, as you think about strategic growth, like what are the one or two things that you think are important to look at? And then I guess any other closing comments you want to throw in, you could we can mention that now, and then we can close the session out in the next 3 or 4 minutes.
You wanna go, Mike?
Sure. I think the strategic growth is obviously important. To your point, Keith, not just doing an acquisition or a merger just to do it. I think you have to have the right people and processes in place. And which markets will support your specific industry, throughout the country, or is it globally? But I think it really comes down to, as I mentioned earlier, people, process, and technology. But continuous improvements, strategically, and then it's just paramount now in the day and age we're in now is investing and retaining employees. It's rather costly to lose employees. So if you invest in them accordingly, and technology is a big part of it, along with like SMART goals and things of that nature, work-life balance, etc. I think those are very important as companies grow and expand globally.
Yeah, and I would say for my organization, we are focused on becoming a higher growth company. So that'll inform our decision making as well. We're looking to be more, less market sensitive. We don't want to have to worry about what's happening in the market and our businesses. We want them to be in less market sensitive environments. And we're also focused on being a nimble company. So we want to do what we want to do, make these investments, be higher growth, but at the same time, not sacrifice being nimble. And continuously sort of, we'll be thinking about, optimizing our operating model. So that is going to be, growth with, while being efficient as well. So those are the pointers for me for next few years.
Great. No, thank you both for those closing comments. Yeah, this was great. I guess before I hand it back to Nick, I want to thank Michael and Ankar, our panelists. I think this was a great session. I hope people in the audience had at least 1 or 2 things to take away from this. I know I had several notes that I took away from this, so I certainly appreciate the discussion and the questions from the audience. And I guess at this point, Nick, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great. Well, thank you all for such an insightful panel discussion. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event.